Okay, hi everybody. This is Dan Collins of the CUNY Kingsborough Math and Computer Science Department. And in this video, I'm going to give a bare bones basics of what you need to do to get started with the Blackboard Grade Center. So let's actually open that up to begin with. Over here on the left, you have the standard menu of location buttons here. That's visible to both you and the students. You can modify those buttons here. You can add buttons. You can delete buttons if you want to. A little bit further below that, there's the course management menu, which is in gray. Only you as the instructor can see that. The students do not have access to any of this stuff. About the fifth thing down there in that list is Grade Center. And I think the easiest way to get in the Grade Center is this right arrow that's just to the right of that. That's what I usually do. You can see that tooltip pop up and say, go to Grade Center page. So I'll click on that. So here we are in the Grade Center, and the Blackboard Grade Center is very rich with features. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to do, I don't think, even 15% of what's available here. I'm just trying to do the smallest number of things we can do to get started with the Grade Center. We're currently looking at this practice classroom here. When you enter for your classes, you'll see all your students listed here in different rows. In this particular example, there's just one single fake student here because I certainly didn't want to show actual student data here or anything like that. So just one single row here. Obviously, there's a bunch of columns with different information for each student. One of the nice things about this list of students is maybe you could use that to fill out an attendance sheet, is what I do sometimes to get started with my semester. If you click a button next to one or more students, you can actually send them emails directly from here. There's this menu right here, email selected users, and you'd go to a page where you enter the topic and the body and things like that. Most of these types of interfaces, the top box here, if you click that, it's going to select all of your students all at once. And obviously for me, there's just one here. So sometimes that's kind of handy to use. Notice at the bottom of the spreadsheet here, however many students you've got clicked show up as selected rows. And so sometimes that's kind of nice. Like you can just click that top box and immediately see how many students you've got registered right there. So that's kind of nifty. I don't usually use the email all capacity myself. Like I'd use an announcement for something like that, probably. But sometimes I send out emails to maybe just the students that missed a test or something like that. So this kind of makes it easy. In all of these columns here, they're sortable. And that's kind of standard for these types of interfaces. So if I click on last name, it sorts all my students alphabetically by last name. And if you click it again, it actually reverses the order from A to Z. It switches it to Z to A. So if it's handy, I could sort people by last name. I could sort all my students by first name if for some reason I only remember that. I could sort them by their total grade in the course, which I do sometimes, or maybe the grades in a particular assignment or test. So any one of these things, you can sort the students by that if you like. So at this point, let's look at the different columns that are set up for you. And what we're currently looking at is how you're going to see the Grade Center as it first exists, as it's first populated by IT when your Blackboard module is initially made for your class. So I think this will be just about the same columns you'll see at that point. Obviously, you have the last name of the student. You have the first name of the student that you need. The next four columns, which are username, student ID, last access, and availability, those aren't hugely important. We don't tend to use those a whole heck of a lot. So I think that many people just hide those entirely from the view just to get the screen real estate back and not be confused by that. If you want to do that, each of these columns has this right button here. You click on that for the options menu, and you notice the last thing here is hide from instructor view. So if you'd like to do that, go ahead and do that. I'm not going to spend time in this video doing that, but that actually is how my Blackboard is set up myself, is I have all that stuff hidden because it doesn't matter too much. Now, the other two columns here that exist when you first get into this interface are there to represent numeric scores. Numeric weighted scores, hopefully, at the end of your course. There's weighted total and there's total. And mostly I'm going to get back to this at the end of this video once you see individual assignments being made and you kind of see how those are being used. I'll just point out that total has this green check mark next to it. Exactly one column here has to be designated as the external grade. And what that indicates is the intention that that's the final grade that you're going to enter into the registrar's, or for us, the CUNY First system, at the end of the semester for the final grade for the student. Little side note, I did used to teach at a different institution that had things set up that there was a single button here sitting in Blackboard at the end of the semester. You just click that button, and whatever was in that external total grade column automatically got sent over to the registrar's system with no extra work. So obviously we don't have that at CUNY yet. We still have to copy the grades out of this and paste it over into CUNY First at the end. But anyway, that's the intention of the green check mark, is that's going to be the final grade. So let's pretend, for the purposes of this basic video, that we're in a normal semester situation where we're meeting our students in class and we're giving them paper exams and grading it, and we're collecting paper assignments and grading those. And obviously at the time that I'm recording this, that's not actually the situation that we're in, but I think it gives the best mental model to get started with, thinking about what it would look like if we had standard paper tests and you wanted to put those grades in a standard paper grade book, and you're just taking one single step away from that. I'll come back in another video and kind of give more advanced ideas, but let's just say you had standard grades and you wanted to enter those. So every grade is going to be a new column. If you are making a new assignment, you're going to have to add another column to the system. So over here, kind of near the top left, you see a button that says Create Column to do that. So as soon as I click on that, we're going to go to another page and we're going to fill in information about that new assignment or that new assessment that we're creating for our class right now. So here we go. Create Column. Remember, column is really an assignment as far as we're concerned. So I'll give this column a name, and I'll call this Homework 1. Other information you can fill in if you want to. The things that have a little orange asterisk are required. So the other stuff I'll just leave empty. Feel free to explore that or add that if you like. It won't make too much difference. But anyway, so this assignment here that I'm calling Homework 1. By default, that's going to show up as a number, a numerical score, when we fill that in the grade center. Leave that the same, leave that the same. Now, one thing that I'm going to be a little careful about is I will give this a category, because that'll make life easy for us at the end when we fill in our calculated final grade formula. So under category here, I am going to pick assignment for this homework. And then the other thing here you see that definitely is required is the points possible, the maximum points possible in this assignment. And let's say I give homeworks and I score them at 20 points each, something like that. I think that's basically it. So other stuff that's interesting here, feel free to investigate that if you like. I'm not going to modify any of that other stuff. And I think we're good with this assignment, and I'll hit submit. So back in the grade center now, you can see that we have this new rightmost column labeled Homework 1 that we just created. And assuming I give that to the students and I get it back and now I have grades, I'm ready to enter them, you just click on this cell right here and you can fill in a number that this student got for that. So maybe this particular student got 18 points on that homework, and I'll hit enter. And there you go, and now that's being recorded in our grade center. When I hit enter, if I had more than a single student, it would progress to the next row down, and so you can just sit here and enter the numbers and hit enter and just go all the way down your students, assuming you've got the grades in the same order there. So that's kind of convenient. That's it. That's how you make like a standard assignment on your own in the Blackboard Grade Center. So just to be perfectly clear, let's go do that again. I'll make a second homework here. So that was create column, fill in a name, and this one's going to be Homework 2. You can kind of see in that drop down that I've done this before. Leave that, leave that, leave that, leave that. Category I'm setting to assignment here. I'll point out that you can make your own categories actually. So I'll leave that for a more advanced video, but if you like, you actually can make your own categories. Again, 20 points for one of these hypothetical homeworks, and we're good. Great. So now we're getting quite a few columns here, and I will use the scroll bar to kind of move over to the right of the grade center, and you can see that's where the new column showed up. And hypothetically, let's just say our student got 15 points on this assignment. All right, now it's time for a test. Really not going to be any different actually if I'm giving a standard test in class. Create column, give it a name. Nothing different so far. This is all good. This is all good. Now, category instead of assignment, I'm gonna label this test. And again, this will keep it distinguished from the assignments when we make our weighted grades at the end of the semester. So I'll click test here. And hypothetically, let's say that on one of my midterm exams, I grade those to 50 points or something like that. Okay, that's all you need. Again, I gotta scroll over to the right here to find that new column. And let's say I've given the test and I've graded them, and this particular student got 45 points out of the 50, and I'll hit enter. So you can do that maybe you would add a couple more homeworks, obviously. Most of us give 3, maybe 4 tests or exams, as we call them, through the course of the semester. You get to the end of the semester, and the majority of us in our department are going to give a final exam. So let's make that. Again, basically no different. Create column. Give it a name like final exams, probably pretty good. Now, the one wrinkle here, the way I'm doing this today here, is under category, I'm going to be careful to make this not the same as one of the other 2 things that I've made. So I'm actually going to leave that as just no category. It's clearly not an assignment. It's not one of the normal tests. It's going to be a different category in our final grade system. So I'm actually going to leave that as no category, to be clear about that. And just to be creative here, I'm going to say maybe I have a final exam that I graded 80 points instead of something different. I'm just showing you here that this number doesn't have to be 100 or anything like that. If you're giving a college algebra exam with 40 questions, why not make this 40? I actually do have a programming final exam that actually does come out to 80 points, which is why I have that on my mind right now. So there's that. All right, so same thing, hit submit. And now you'll see the rightmost column that I have to scroll over to get to. There's final exam. So maybe on this 80 question final exam, this student comes through and they do pretty well and they get 75 out of 80. Nice. Enter. So there's the points. Okay, so you do that through the course of the semester. Now I'm going to come back to these calculated grade columns that were pre-existing when we came into our Grade Center module. And I'm going to go into weighted total, and that's actually where all the math exists for the formula for the final grade in our course. So you can modify any one of these columns with this little drop-down arrow here. Click for more options. And here I'm going to click Edit Column Information, which you could do on any one of these things if you want to go back and change what's sitting for the scope of any one of these assignments. So Edit Column Information. Now, this column is what's called a calculated grade column, so it has a little bit more information to deal with than the assignments that we just made. The name weighted total was already there for us to begin with. You can see that Blackboard filled in a description, and you can see that the intention of this column is to be a weighted sum of all the grades for a user based on item or category weighting. And this defaults to percentage basis, and I'll leave that as is because that looks perfectly fine to me. Now, down here there's this section called Select Columns, and what you're doing here is you're selecting what other assignments in the grade system are feeding into a formula here to compute what's called the weighted total. So, I think that it's easiest to deal with things on a categorical basis instead of one column at a time. So down here on the second box on the left, we're going to be picking the categories that will be used for the basis of this final grade. And I'm going to start with assignment. So I've picked assignment, and over here in the middle there's this little right arrow, and when I click that it's going to send the assignment category over here into this big box of things that you have selected for your formula. So I'll click that right arrow. And now you can see that the assignment category has shown up. And one thing you definitely have to fill in is what percentage of the final grade that is. So for me, I'm going to click 15%. I'm going to type in 15% there, which is what I usually do. A couple other choices that you have to make. Weighting of the columns. So, my assignments are all the same point value all the time, and therefore it wouldn't make a particle of difference which one of these buttons I pressed. But hypothetically, let's say you had 2 assignments, and one you'd scored to 40 points and one you'd scored to 60 points, for example. Now, if you have the equally button clicked, that's going to get averaged out as 50-50 weighting. They're going to be weighted equally. If you clicked proportionally, then they would account for 40% and 60% of the assignment average, if that's what you wanted. I'm not sure many of us do that in our department. I always have it set to equally. And again, if I give the same points for every assignment, it doesn't even matter which button I pick. So that's usually left just like that. One thing that I actually do that you might think about is you do have the option of dropping grades. And I think if anybody does that at all, you're going to probably be dropping lowest grades. And so personally, I actually do drop the one lowest grade out of all the homework assignments for each student. And so if I fill in 1, Blackboard will just automatically take care of that. Drop the one lowest grade, take the average of the rest, and that's going to be the assignment component here. So there's that. Got to do that for the other two things. So I'm going to come back over here to categories to select, click test, right? This isn't just one single test. It's the whole test category. It's anything that you tagged with the test category up until now. Come over here and hit that right arrow, and you can see that now at the top, we have the test category. How much are the in-class tests worth? Let's say, like in my classes, they're usually 50%. And I actually do drop the one lowest grade by the end of it. So you could fill that in if you like. And again, what that's saying is anything you've got tagged as tests, average them all up, and that's going to compose 50% of your weighted total here. Last thing is the final exam. Now remember, we didn't give a category for that. So in this case, I'm going to go to the top box here and just pick that one single column that I labeled final exam and send that thing over in the selected columns. So I'll be using this right arrow next to that. And since this is just one single column, not a whole category, there's a much smaller number of choices to make to it. The only thing you can pick here is just what percent that is for your final grade. So a lot of us use 35% for the component of the final exam. I'll fill that in, and we're pretty much good to go. You notice that what you put in for percentages here is getting added up for total weight. That does have to add up to 100%, or else the Grade Center is going to complain at you when you go to submit this to them, actually. But this all adds up nicely, so I think that'll work fine. Now, the last thing that is a little bit tricky to think about is there is this calculate as running total choice down here below that. And you can see that the text says a running total only includes items that have grades or attempts. Selecting no includes all items in the calculations using a value of 0 for an item if there is no grade. So let me kind of rephrase that. The decision you're making here is if a student just has a blank in any particular assignment, should you be generous and just discount that and not include that at all in the calculations, or should you count that blank as a 0? Yes, here would be generous and not even consider the blanks at all, but no would be strict and count the blanks as zeros. So here's what I'm going to recommend if you're doing this for the first time. If you are adding the columns as you go through the semester, right? You give an assignment and you don't actually create the column until you're adding the grades to that, you might as well just leave this to no, right? And you do have to select that manually because that's not default. You ought to just leave that as no. And assuming you've given a test and assuming you've got the results back and you fill in the column and there's a blank there, it seems pretty evident to me that that student deserves a 0 in that particular assignment or test. Now, for me, it's a little bit more complicated because I do pre-populate my whole grade center with all the tests and all the assignments before the students actually meet me for the first time. And in that case, I do have to keep that as yes throughout the semester, and I have to go up here and I have to fill in, drop the two lowest test scores, namely the two tests that haven't actually happened yet and won't happen until the future. Obviously, I don't want to be adding in zeros as for blanks for tests that haven't actually occurred, because that would make it look like all the students are failing all the time and they're going to get weirded out and anxious, which you don't want. So for me, I have that as yes, and then every couple of weeks I have to come in here and adjust the number that I'm dropping for the number that currently haven't occurred yet. Anyway, so a little more complicated for me. If you want to avoid that, again, just add the columns as you go through the semester. Leave this as no. You'll never have to worry about it, as opposed to me that has to come through and update this all the time. Make sure that's no at the end of the semester. The very last thing I do before I send my grades to CUNY First is I come in here and just double check that I've got these set as no, so that I'm not accidentally giving a passing grade to a student that came in once, submitted one passing assignment, and then never showed up ever again, which is totally what would happen if you had that set to yes. Make sure that's set to no at the very end, and that's what we have set up here today in this example, so I think we're good to go. And I'll hit submit, and that's kind of the story of the weighted total column. And here's the last thing. So now I'm going to come over to total, and this is actually going to be a lot easier for us. All the work's really sitting there in the weighted total. You can see the weighted total has that percentage computed here. Feel free to double check that. And if you wanted to double check that, what you do, remember I'm dropping the lowest homework. So you take the best homework, which is the one remaining, compute 18 divided by 20. Take 15% of that. Take this test here, compute 45 divided by the possible 50. Take 50% of that. And then take this final exam, 75 divided by 80. Take 35% of that. Add those up, and that ought to be this number here for this sample student, if you just want to double check that. Sometimes if I'm being like really, super careful and probably taking more time than I should, I do maybe one of those at the end of the semester just to make sure I didn't bungle something. So there's that. So last thing is this total grade. Again, the green check mark is the external grade, is the final thing that we intend to send to CUNY First at the end. I like to see that as a letter, and I like the students to see that as a letter as the semester goes on. That's actually not the default, so I'm going to go in there and set that up right now. Remember that little down arrow here gives us the options menu, and that edit column information for any of these columns is how you can modify how things are currently set up. That name was already set there by Blackboard automatically when the module was made, so that's pretty good. So here's primary display. It's set to score, which is numeric, and I'm going to hit this drop down, and I'm going to pick letter instead. And what that's going to do is that's going to present the person's final grade as A or B or C with a plus or minus modifier possibly. So I kind of like that, and of course that is here at CUNY Kingsborough, that is how we have to report final grades to the CUNY First system, so I think that makes sense to see that. And then down here, again, this is a calculated column, like weighted total, so we kind of have the same options here, but I'm going to make this a lot simpler because all the work was really done in that weighted total column. So all I'm going to do here is just pick the single weighted total column that has that number in it, click the right-hand arrow, and that's it. So what I'm saying here is for this total column, just look at the number in the weighted total, which has all the formula stuff, and just turn that into a letter. That's all that's going to happen. The way that we've got that set up, the calculators are running total, doesn't even make any difference here. That works, again, all taken care of in the weighted total column, so don't even worry about that. And I'll hit submit. And so now you can see that that letter has appeared here for this one sample student. And as I think standard college grading would work, if you have a value of 91%, that's probably going to be like an A- here. And Blackboard is automatically set up to recognize that as the default letter formula. If I didn't already say it, things in the 90s are going to be A's, things in the 80s are going to be B's, 70s are C's, 60s are D's, and anything below 60 shows up as an F there. You can modify that calculation on your own. That's called a grading schema in Blackboard. You can modify the formulas for how the letters are determined. You can make up your own brand new ones. You can make a PRS grading system if you're in a class that gives grades that way. I'm going to leave that possibly for a more advanced video because I think that right there is the basics, the bare minimum you need to have the Grade Center be at least somewhat useful to you. You can make columns for new assignments and tests. You're going to apply the categories kind of carefully. You're going to set your formula for final grades over here in weighted total, and you're just going to set total to letter. Again, looking over at the weighted total, turn that into a letter. And then at the end of the semester, you can just basically copy-paste the letters in that checkmark column and import that over into CUNY First. And that's how you're going to get your grades over there if you're being really efficient about it. So I hope that's helpful. And if you see me around Kingsborough, feel free to ask a question or a comment. or email me or something like that. And be on the lookout for other possibly more advanced things. If there's a particular advanced thing that you want to know about, tell me about it, and I'll try to maybe make a video helping you with that. And I'll look forward to any other comments or questions, and I'll see you next time.